Hey everyone, my name is Chris Lambert, and on this channel we talk Kanye West. And today we're going to go over the part one of Kanye West and Nick Cannon's interview that came out just yesterday. And I was trying to figure out how best to make this interesting for y'all, because I figure you're either going to watch the interview or kind of come to me to overview it. But for those of you that have watched it, that's a little bit boring. But I thought one of the ways we could make it interesting is just to make some of the references a little bit more 3D. So you can see in my notes here that I've highlighted some things, and we're just going to be kind of going through some of what Kanye references through the interview to just kind of give those things more of a visual, more context that you may have an understanding of it or get what he was talking about, but just get a little more depth and detail on it. So we're going to do that. And his interview came about a couple weeks back. You can see here, posted to R. Kanye by Des Myers 18 days ago, Nick Cannon and Jerome the House in Wyoming with Ye. And you can see that the haircut from the interview here, Kanye still has the 2020 in the side and the coloring. And the last time you can see that is August 14th. Kanye still has that coloring and the 20 in his head. Right there and right there. And that's what you can see right there in the interview. So that was still present as of the 14th, but then a couple days later, it looks like it's already gone, especially after Kanye tweets all of this stuff, right? Where's the photo from the 17th? Dun, 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 dun. Still going a little. Yeah, by this time on the 17th, Kanye's already had his head not fixed, but changed, right? You can see that the hair's been cut and he's kind of back to the normal hairstyle that we're used to seeing Kanye. And this is just a couple days later, and you can see he's got the fresh cuts on the 18th. So it probably was before the 14th or in like before the 17th at least that they did this interview, if you're just kind of looking for the time frame. So between South Carolina, but before Kanye took his trip with Kim and the kids. So we can see that there, and I'm going to get rid of this and get rid of this and also get rid of this. So this is the interview, and I just kind of took notes going down all the way through, like Kanye talking about being a provider, the tone of morality and spirituality that he brings to that. When he was in the hospital in 2016, he picked up the Bible, and that's really when he started getting back into the Bible. And Nick Cannon says at one point, like, you know, we both grew up in like households that were religious, and you know, you've been the same guy since 2004 with Jesus Walks. But Kanye himself says that it really wasn't until 2016 when he was hospitalized that he really came around to actually having this faith, despite, you know, songs like Never Let Me Down and Jesus Walks. God Has a Calling Uses Us. He says that he likes being cool and kind of having this understanding that taking this religious route isn't necessarily the cool thing to do, right? But it's a thing that he needs to do. And then he gets into Forbes snubbing him for 3 years, not putting him on the billionaires list, and has this great quote of almost everything he does, he breaks the model, right? And it's his favorite thing. Working on schools, communities, and cities, and he says that it's not just like charter cities, right, but like actual cities, and says, if I sound normal, then the whole world failed, just not me, not just me, and that he likes to think super normal, and Nick Cannon says he's a multi-genius, which gets a laugh out of him. And then he has this great line about my whole thing I hate about 1 billionaires. Which, like, yeah, at this point, his net worth is in like 3, 5. He says 5. He talked about Bloomberg putting him at 3.3, but after the Gap deal, it shot up. But he's talking about, like, if you're a 1 billionaire and you go to Taco Bell, then, you know, you're no longer a billionaire because you went to Taco Bell. But when you're a multi-billionaire, you can do whatever you want. And he says he won't, like, accept any Taco Bell slander. We know that Kanye loves his fast food, Taco Bell and McDonald's. Even though he's snubbed by Forbes, he's recognized by God. Atheists told him not to mention Jesus as much when they were coming to Sunday service, right? Because the initial incarnations of Sunday service, there wasn't as much gospel music. It was choir renditions of Kanye songs. and then some like religious songs that were kind of peppered in, but just choir renditions then of popular songs as well. And in that first wave of more public or VIP concerts that he was doing in that February through April 2019 period, you had a lot of celebrities that were going, a lot of people that were just like friends and family going, and they talked about it as being, oh, what's the term? Not a-religious. Oh God, I'm blanking. It's a very popular word when it's like not one religion, right? And you get an air that there's like something religious to it, but it's just kind of for everyone. It's really going to bother me that I can't think of the word, but it was more of that feel. And even when Kim went on to talk shows, or Courtney or Chloe went on to talk shows, and they were asked about Sunday service, they were saying it's not a church, you know, it's for everybody. There's not really that much of a religious element to it. And then when Kanye was told, like, you know, try not to mention Jesus as much at these things because that's kind of ruining the vibe for everyone. He's like, that's all I needed to hear. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And just started talking. Same thing with the MAGA hat, right? Like, you can't wear that hat. I can't. And then he puts it on. Crying at the thought of his daughter. You can't really say the word or you get like demonetized in the video. Family is so... Yeah. Family is the key to the world, period. Relates friends, coworkers, and cultures to family. Yeah, so he says, like, family is the key to the world, but then says it's not just, like, your family. Like, you need to look at your friends as family, your coworkers as a family, the culture you're in, like, your state, your country, all of that as, like, part of family. When you have that notion, like, it's the key to everything. Designs don't promote family, they promote separation, capital opportunity in that situation. He talks about, like, you know, design that keeps people isolated and away from one another. And then puppy just walked by the window, away from one another, and then sad, so they go to the bars just to kind of find connection, or they do something else that they spend money just to find what they're missing, because the design doesn't promote family, it doesn't promote connection, it promotes you being on your own and lonely, so then you spend money. And this is where he talks about the kibbutz design and primitive cultures. So the kibbutz is actually something that was really popular in Israel. And it's essentially like a community where everything's kind of shared. You each have your individual homes, but you all pool your money together, you pool resources together. I got to do the birthright trip when I was 25, which is just like a free trip to Israel. And they send you over there and they're like, hey, you know what? You should have kids with another Jewish person to increase the Jewish population. That's really like the whole gimmick. But you get to go like 6 days to Israel for free, or 7 days to Israel for free. They pay for the flights. They take you all around. They show you all the stuff. But a couple of the days you actually live or stay on kibbutzes, which was kind of cool. We didn't get that much interaction with the people that we saw, but it would be like, they have tourist bars on location, right? Where people that are coming to stay while they're traveling can go like have drinks. Everybody ate in a couple of them that we stayed at, in like a communal dining room, kind of just like a cafeteria hall. But they all would like, they had chickens, they had farms, they had different jobs that they were assigned. It's very much this like mix between capitalism and communism, and very like communal and family driven in terms of like everybody's working together. And yeah, so I don't know, it was a cool experience to have when I got to experience it. But Kanye's saying that that's one of the things that he's looking for, is when you go to a kibbutz and the family dynamic that it creates because of just the layout of the place, the dependency on one another, and the responsibility you have to each other, and the relationship that brings. Yeah. And then he talks about how his perspective is kind of a little broader because he's lived in China. You know, his mom taught a year over in China, so he was there for like a full year. And he was 10 years old at the time, I do believe. And then lived in Paris, London, Atlanta, Chicago, New York, California, now Wyoming. Like, he really got to see all these different like metropolitan and artistic but very capital driven places, like from Paris, London, Atlanta, Chicago, New York, California, before ending up in Wyoming, which is kind of the antithesis of all of that. It's more nature driven, it's more solitary, and that comes up a little bit later too. And he talks about how when he's on his property and sees a family of 3 deer in front of the cabin, he becomes very aware of like God in nature and God in man and the connection to God. And there's just something very beautiful about that, which I can imagine him thinking about the difference between just like being in Hidden Hills or Calabasas, right? And he and Nick talk about school inside of a church, how when they were growing up, you'd see all these schools inside churches. Same kind of thing in my hometown, Canal Fulton, Ohio. I had friends that went to St. Philip's and James, which was just a school attached to the church, and they were there from kindergarten through 8th grade, just like 26 of them in the same grade together, like all the way through, never leaving the class with each other. You know, they did some amazingly like crazy things. Those kids were wild. And he says, when you remove fear and love of God, you open up the fear and love of everything else. And I think that's kind of been something that Kanye's kind of talked about, that he had periods where he started to covet material possessions or started to be afraid of being canceled or saying the wrong thing, because you're starting to fear society and culture and these things that you own and losing them, losing position. But when you are just focused on God and the fear and love of God, you don't have to worry about the rest of that. And that there's something very empowering about that, and something very like grounding about that. And I mean, I can imagine just from the fact that if you're worried about 30 things and you reduce that to just this one thing that gives you guidance and direction, yeah, it makes a big difference. Communicate as simple as Yoda is something that he wants to kind of get at, which sounds funny, but at the same time, I think a lot of the concepts that we get from media, like movies, books, and all of that, that seem kind of idealistic or far-fetched, like time travel in a story, or faster than light travel in sci-fi, like any of those things, we eventually start to like get closer to those things being the case, right? Whether that's robots, androids, like crazy smart AI systems that have personalities. Each year that goes by, it feels like we get a little closer to the reality of that. The fact that Yoda has become such a beloved figure and a wise figure and associated with wisdom and talks so simply, it's goofy on the one hand, but it also strikes something because Yoda resonates as a character, as a figure. There's something powerful to that notion, and Kanye is just looking to extract what that is, and how do you capture that in reality, and what's that look like in reality. Fights over words in the future will be over water, which, yeah, he talks about just like modern society, we're crazy about fighting over words and like who said this and what said this, and all the canceling that goes on these days, some for good reasons, some for wild reasons, but that eventually there's going to come a time where we're fighting over water. Like resources are going to become scarce at some point, especially when you have like Nestle and these other companies like scrounging up water, and he wants to deal with that, right? Not worry about words and what's being said, but like worry about the serious things like water, like that as a problem, and thinking about that before it's a problem. Learn what the essentials are, bought McMansions and add taste to them, but was disappointed in the whole thing. I mean, his house in Hidden Hills, and this is something that I probably should have brought up, but his house in Hidden Hills took them like 4 years or 5 years to remodel and renovate. Actually, no, it's this right here. I did have it brought up. So their minimalist home, which was Axel Vervoort, they took what 4 or 5 years to actually move into it, and it cost them like millions and tens of millions of dollars to get it arranged to how they wanted, because they went back in, they stripped out a lot of stuff, they redesigned a lot of stuff. Like, it didn't come with hallways that looked like this, right? And they redid a ton of stuff in the backyard to get this pool right and all this stuff. They spent all this money, and Kanye talks about still being like disappointed, and that he had always wanted to be an Architectural Digest. He had been reading AD since he was 18, and he always promised himself he wouldn't have $1 million pieces of art on the wall, that he wasn't going to be that kind of person that did it. But then, lo and behold, he has a Anish Kapoor, which is $1 million piece of art, and he's saying like, I had that, and like they come here to photograph the house and it's there. Like, why do you need that when there are homeless people in front of the Gucci store? You know, just getting at this contrast between the excess in America and the lack of help there are for people in need. Lack of help there are, the lack of help there is for people in need. And this is Architectural Digest. Like, this is their spread. And this is the Anish Kapoor fiberglass sculpture. That's it. Just that right there. And he talks about Axel, who's the famed architect and designer who helped Kanye like build this place. But like, that's it. $1 million for that. Just a circle, a hollowed out circle. It's cool. It certainly brings an aesthetic, but like $1 million for that? Wild. So he just like is feeling a little, I'm disgusted in some ways. And he talks about creating clothing at the Gap, designers who worked at Louis and at Celine. The fact that like they have these top tier designers who only usually make clothes for the elites who buy Gucci and Louis and Celine, that are now working on a project for Gap. And that people that can't afford those other things but can't afford Gap, all clothes under $100, how amazing that's going to be for people, that you're now getting that talent and that eye to be able to make clothes for everybody to wear. Really cool designer talking about her waterproof bag. Yeah, so Kanye builds up this designer and he's like, we have this girl on our team. She's amazing. She like walked the runway. She's fantastic. And then he goes off on Virgil and he starts talking about Virgil and Walter Van Beirendorck. I'll have to delete that and get to the next thing. But where is it? Walter Van Beirendonck. Yeah. And he never finishes the story about the really cool designer, which is a shame because I was curious to hear what he had to say about it. But he talks about Virgil and that the Roach, and that when they were interning and like doing all this stuff at all these high fashion houses, Kanye would look at the Roach and say he needs to replace that shoe. Like that's what he needs to do one day. And now at the airport, you see 350s, but no Roach anymore. And the Roach was just this classic Nike shoe and was incredibly popular. You just see it everywhere. And like you'd see alternative designs on it, but this was like the classic Nike. And yeah, you don't see as much about it anymore. You see a lot more Adidas, or you see Jordans, or you see Yeezys. So we have that. And he talks about now he wants to replace the Louis duffel. So this is the Louis duffel. Oh no, my mouse just died. What a time for my mouse to die. So we're going to spend an extended amount of time talking about the Louis bag. You can see here that Kanye with Kanye's legendary Louis Vuitton bag. Yeah, it's just this camo bag. And you can see him there with the Louis backpack. Yep. Louis bags. Am I right? So we got that. Oh, come on. 1 second. Mouse coming back to life. Maybe. There we go. Okay. So we have that, plugging the mouse back in. An Adidas contract, he needs to be able to wear Jordans. Yeah, that was actually pretty funny. He just talks about like, yeah, I need to be able to wear Jordans. It's like needs to be part of reparations. And he says you can't tell a black man you can't wear Jordans just because Jordans are such an iconic shoe, right? Like the shoe. Which was just one of the funny moments. I think that's one of the best things about the interview. I had somebody ask me if it was worth watching or not. And like, of course, yes. But at the same time, I was thinking like, what is the maximum value somebody's going to get out of this interview? Or like, what's the selling point of the interview? And I think it's just like how funny Kanye is and how self-aware he is throughout this interview. That was the thing that really stood out to me. Just a lot of humor and a lot of insight. You don't get a lot of groundbreaking stuff in it. Like, I feel like the Charlemagne the God interview Kanye did was a lot more like, oh my goodness, I never knew this, or what an interesting moment of psychology. But there's something about this interview that's just very like fun and refreshing, and getting to see the humor that Kanye has. I don't know, it's very humanizing. But then he also wanted to a thing in the contract about you can wear your friend's clothes. Like, even if they're at a competitor, you should be able to wear your friend's clothes. And he talks about Walter Van Beerdork or Donk, and says that black people are always on their own, and says we'll tear ourselves down, talking about like within the community. And you don't really need somebody like Walter then coming in to try and do it. And he can't even pronounce Walter's name, which I don't think most of us can at that point. Like most of us are like Byron Donk. Is that right? Byron Donk? But this was really the drama, was that Virgil's latest show had inspiration from Walter, and Walter was like pissed about it, calling it like theft and how dare he. And you can see like in the middle's Walter's, and on the right is Virgil's. So yeah, very similar in that like I am referencing you, but because it's not giving credit, like it's not giving credit, even though it's such anybody in the industry knows. It's a weird line. I made a whole video on it, but Kanye got like pretty upset by Walter calling out Virgil, because like how hard somebody like Virgil had to work to reach this spot, and how against all odds it is, right? For a black man to become the head of Louis Vuitton menswear, that's crazy and had never happened. So Kanye just points out the fact that like you see African cubism here. And this is when he was on his rant on August 11th, African cubism and what it looks like. And then you compare it to Van Gogh, very similar with that 2D'ing the three-dimensional. So you take a three-dimensional face and you render it in 2D, and it has a very startling appearance. And that's the thing that Picasso is very much known for, are those portraits in that style. And here you have African cubism doing it way before Picasso. And yeah. So he just kind of points that out of like everybody's borrowing from each other, and like so many people have already stolen from black culture that when a black man even borrows an idea or references an idea, you have to call him out and attack him. No, wasn't gonna let that happen. So Kanye talks about that. Virgil's going to Louis hurt Kanye. Yeah, because he was the Louis Vuitton Don. He wanted to be the Louis Vuitton Don, like the actual head. Oh my God, I'm so bright. But he worked at the Gap before he even knew what high fashion was, right? But he aspired to that point. And that actually caused friction, because there were reports right after Virgil was announced that like they had a falling out over this. Like it was the position Kanye had always wanted. Virgil, like Kanye's protege or like co-collaborator, like got the position. And so this was a really emotional hug at Virgil's first show when Kanye like showed up, and you can see like they were both crying, and it makes me want to tear up because I'm just a softie and emotionally react to what anyone else is doing. Yeah, so pulled in by Marc Jacobs, millionaire sunglasses with Pharrell and shoes with Pharrell. So that's what kind of got Kanye into higher fashion, was these millionaire sunglasses and the Marc Jacobs Pharrell collaboration. And you can see that this is kind of the start of it. In 2004, Pharrell and Nigo collaborated with Marc Jacobs on the sunglasses. And they were re-released by Louis Vuitton in 2007 in new colorways. So this was kind of cool. This Complex article referenced Donda's book, Raising Kanye, and Donda talks about was not knowing what to get Kanye. And he's very particular and knows what he wants. So Christmas of 2005, she was at a loss trying to figure out what to get him. And she was going to jump and buy a Best Buy gift card because of Kanye's love of music and movies. You can't go wrong with that, right? But then she talked to Don C, and Don told her that Kanye had been talking about the millionaire sunglasses. So she had a friend at the Beverly Hills Louis Vuitton, good old Donna, and Donna helped Donda get these millionaire sunglasses. And she said she almost broke the bank to do it, but his reaction when I handed him those millionaire glasses was worth it. I can definitely see Kanye with a sunglasses line. I don't know of anything Kanye is as passionate about as he is his music and visuals, unless it's his clothes. Yeah, and there he is in those very glasses, which is kind of cool, and with the awesome Jesus piece. So millionaire glasses were a huge deal for him. A gift from his mother is also really memorable too. And then he talks about how high fashion wasn't in competition in sportswear. So in 2009, he had a collaboration with both Louis Vuitton on a shoe and Nike on a shoe because they weren't in a non-compete. So when he was looking at Louis Vuitton and looking at the contract and they had their non-competes, Nike wasn't listed, and vice versa with Nike. And then he did the shoe with each of them and both got pissed. And there was a falling out really with both places because I'm pretty sure he had a larger deal going on with Louis Vuitton, if I'm remembering correctly, and they backed out. And then he also had more going on with, me trying to figure out if the Azaret dropped. And then he also had more going on with Nike, and that relationship soured. And maybe that's actually part of why the relationship with Nike soured. I mean, they did do the Air Yeezy 2, right, in 2012. But it never went how it should have gone, you know, especially with the success of the Air Yeezy 1. But Kanye talks about how they didn't have a non-compete because like athletic wear and high fashion didn't overlap back then, and he got both deals and both were pissed. And then he starts talking about how it's not the Gap, it's just Gap. Okay, put that in your vernacular. Strike the Gap, keep Gap. And he says he needs all the smoke. And Nick Cannon starts to say like it's fuel for you, right? Like you getting all this like feedback and backlash from people, like that's what fuels you. And Kanye like it's kind of like no, like it's fuel, but like I need to hear it. It's humbling as well. It's almost like he wants to set people off just to hear that chorus to like bring himself back down when he starts to feel like the ego getting too high or too disconnected. That was a low key but kind of a key thought to me, because we've heard him talk about the fuel he gets from that, or we've heard him say in the TI interview in 2018 in the wake of Ye and his support of Trump, he talks about, I guess it was before Ye came out, but he talks about when he gets all this backlash from people, even if he tweets like wrong information, right? And people tweet him correcting him or text him correcting him, how helpful that is, because he learns from it. It's like cutting a diamond or putting pressure on a diamond. And through that like exchange of information, that's how you grow, that's how you learn. And so he feels, at least how he expressed in 2018, that even if he's not correct in what he says at the time, he's going to learn from what everybody else tells him, which is something that I've kind of taken to heart in this channel as well. I know I can make a video on something and it may not be great, it may not be perfect, I may miss things, but I'm going to do my best and provide some kind of value. But there are going to be people that know more than me about specific topics and specific points, and they're going to come in and voice their opinion, hopefully in the comments section, and we're all going to learn more because of what I didn't know at the time and what somebody else like takes the time to tell us, which is great. I've learned so much in the 5 years or 6 years we've been chronicling Kanye from those interactions, right? So he talks about like it's humbling to hear that. Like it's not just helpful and it's not just fuel, but it's also humbling to really receive the smoke, right? And that attention. And he talks about how he feels closer to God when I'm on my knees talking to my children. And that was also part of it. Like when you're elevated, you miss out on things. But when you're grounded, when you're brought low, you feel closer to God. And he talks about how the fastest jet goes Mach 3, but the fastest sled goes Mach 6. And here you go. The video of a rocket sled doing 6,599 miles per hour at Holloman AFB is absolutely insane. So there's actually a video of this, which let's see if my mouse is working again. And we can see this. Oh boy, there we go. Hypersonic sled track test. Oh my God. Okay, so that's what 6,000 miles an hour looks like. Jeez, is this slow-mo? Oh, half speed. All right, here we go. Here we go. It's cruising. It's cruising. You still can't see it. A 4th speed? Now, this is an interesting... I missed it. I was talking. One more? No. All right, but that's pretty interesting. But yeah, he's right. It does go Mach 6. Um, and then he talks about in the wake of that that Ray Romulus, I think the husband of Tracy Romulus, who has worked as a PR person for Kanye for the last few years and for Kim, talked about Coachella hangover, how they were trying to build a mountain, but they got lower and the sound amplified for Sunday service. So this is the mountain at Coachella that he's talking about. You can see how elevated they are, kind of above the crowd. This was a hill that rose up. And you can see kind of the angle there. And here's another picture of it being built, right? So they were trying to build something similar just for the Sunday service events in general to do back in California. But what they realized was that it wasn't working. So they actually dug out and got lower into the ground, and the sound amplified for Sunday service. And how like amazing of a concept that was, that when you actually got lower, you sounded better, which in this case with a religious choir, you sound closer to God. So yeah, the lower you are, the more humble you are. God told him to shut up. Catholics, Christians, Don C versus Kanye. Yeah, just when he gets his like ego going, God tells him to kind of shut up. Sometimes you think you do something good. Yeah. Life is a gift. To be in service is the greatest thing. And talks about like brain chemistry and how dopamine and serotonin are like heightened and at their max when you're giving. Like one of the best feelings you can have in the world is being in service and giving. And he felt that way with like giving Virgil the hug that we looked at before. Like if he had it made up with Virgil and like gave that forgiveness or apology to Virgil, then God wouldn't have come back and blessed him with the Gap deal. That's okay because it's the deal that happened with the Gap, right? But blessed him with the Gap deal. Gap is an opportunity for him to be in service, not on high like the Louis Vuitton and doing that for that like high fashion crowd, but actually with Gap and doing something that's for everyone, like affordable. And he remembers being a 14-year-old who couldn't afford things. And he talks about like trying to pick out the UMC tape versus a Pete Rock tape, being at the store and not having a lot of money. Like he'd be in Atlanta for the summer and his dad would be like, all right, you can buy one tape for the summer. That's all that you get. And at 14, Kanye was born in 77, so that would be 91. So when you look at Pete Rock, you can see that All Sold Out with CL Smooth was 1991. And then the UMC, Haz G and Kool Kim, their debut album Fruits of Nature was 1991. So I imagine that's kind of the time frame that Kanye was talking about, like trying to decide between Fruits of Nature and All Sold Out. Let's see, we can get rid of those. And then he starts getting into, you think people don't be understanding me, he says sarcastically. To Cannon, which was really funny because yeah, a lot of people don't understand where Kanye's coming from with things. And he starts talking about like where's home exactly in response to Cannon starting to bring up that there was somebody that Cannon really respected who said that Cannon and Kanye need to just like, they're being paid slaves and need to shut up and like da 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 da. And Kanye responds with where's home exactly and says that his last name is a slave name. And he talks about, I'm laughing at this. He starts to say like, I don't use my mind, and then kind of hears it and rolls his eyes and laughs and is like, people are like, well, obviously. Like the self-awareness and self-deprecation is so great. But he gets into my instinct is infinite, my mind is limited, and starts talking about like reacting from the gut, right? And reacting from instinct and trusting instinct, which I think probably goes to like trusting God, that your instinct is tied to God. But his mind, when you start overthinking things and thinking through things, tends to be more limited. And he talks about like, I hire paparazzi, and gets into things like, I'll buy all the paparazzi. And America, everything is for sale except for our souls, which is still in some ways getting back to this idea of like slavery and what you're tied to and being reduced to. And he says that location's really important and spending less. So he talks about how you can spend 1 million, 100 million for neighbors, like their house in Hidden Hills or in Calabasas. You can spend $100 million, for this place there and be surrounded by people, like have neighbors. But Kanye doesn't want that. You can spend less money than that and have all the land that he has in Wyoming, which I think kind of comes back to that, what we talked about up here, that he's lived in Paris, he's lived in London, he's lived in Atlanta. He's had all these very like city driven experiences, and now is ready just to have more of a nature driven experience. And then he starts talking about Black genocide and getting into the topic of I'm trying to figure out a way to say it that's not going to get the video demonetized, but he gets into here he kind of segues, if God ain't want me to run on stage and say Beyonce had the best video, he wouldn't have sat me in the front row. And his delivery on this is so perfect. I would have been sitting in the back. It wouldn't have made it the first reward, and it wouldn't have made it so ridiculous of an idea because I hadn't heard of this person before. And how he just like runs through that and then says that like essentially God willed it that he interrupt Taylor Swift is pretty amazing. And then he said he only had the bottle of Hennessy because Nick Cannon references that Kanye had the bottle of Hennessy. And he's like, because he didn't want to go to the award show because he knows that it's a setup, that it's all just like fake. So then he talks about the stats and 22.5 million people, and said that Planned Parenthood was set up as a place to limit the minority population. And he does the mayor thing because Nick Cannon starts to like counter that point, which I think is one of the first times we really see that in a Kanye interview where somebody speaks back to the major talking point that other people have been saying against Kanye in that way of like, where was it? Cannon challenges Kanye. Yeah, just that idea of like, other people say Planned Parenthood today does a lot of great stuff that you shouldn't associate what they are today with what they were in the past with their original founder in like 1922, and into the 1940s. Like, is that fair when it's 60 years later, 80 years later, and the work that they're doing helps a lot of people or are in these communities because those are the communities most in need of this kind of medical service, just like in general, like women's health medical service. And Kanye has this moment where he pulls out his phone and does the Mario theme and says, "Here we go," which is a Mario catchphrase, which incredible. I never expected that to happen, and it was fantastic. And he reads some things about the founder of Planned Parenthood and her racist and eugenic beliefs, though I will say that don't know the source on it, which there's been a lot of like, she's not great, right? There's just been a lot of talk and a lot of like mythology of her into the more than what she was, I think. And yeah, I don't know why I even need to get into it, but Kanye's response to Cannon's challenge is that he quotes the Bible saying that he has to go to the Word of God. And he says, God knows you before you were in the womb. And Cannon just like right away is just like Jeremiah 1:5. Like, wow, he just knew that off the bat. And Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Which I guess this is what he's saying to someone. The call of Jeremiah. Okay, the words of Jeremiah's son, Hikkakah, one of the priests of Anaroth in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah, and through the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, down the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, when the people of Jerusalem went into exile. The word of the Lord came to me saying, okay, I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Okay, and that's where that comes from. Interesting. So then we have that, and Kanye goes on, like he said he would send these stats to people like in a text, and others would like get emotional about it and be like, oh my goodness, that's really shocking. And some would just say, thank you for sending that. And Kanye's response is like, why would you thank anyone for that? Like, I don't want to be sending that to you, but I am. And like, you're thanking me for it? What kind of response is thanking me for it? Like, yeah, being polite about it makes you seem crazy in that situation, right? And then he has this quote about well, most people's records that are co-produced by Kanye West are usually their best records, which he says it with such like arrogance but also like silliness, but arrogance. It's a great moment, maybe my favorite moment of the whole interview. And Nick Cannon says like Kanye co-produced "Can I Live," and that's probably like Cannon's best song, he says. And he talks about Donda and Ray making a deal for Kanye to see each of them every other week. This is when Donda was still in Atlanta. And then she took a job in Chicago, which meant only seeing his dad in the summers. A white organization offered my mom more money, and I saw my dad less, which is a big extrapolation. I can see the point that he's getting at, and getting at this idea of like systems in place, or just going back to the idea of like systems of separation that divide us and take people away from people. But at the same time, their relationship wasn't great at that point, and seeking opportunity elsewhere despite that, I don't think anybody can blame her for that. So I think that's one of those like difficult conversations to have, because I see his point that he's talking about, but I think there's more nuance to the conversation that maybe takes away from that point. It hit him to run for president in 2015. The birthday party connects to life and pro-life. These are kids who get to have birthdays. And he talks about how in South Carolina, he cried over North and that choice. And Nick Cannon says that his mom was in a similar place to Kanye's. Like, both of their dads were like, hey, and both of their moms were like, like, we're having this baby. And for Kanye to be in his position and to say what he said, he feels that there are people that in the wake of that have decided to have kids because of that speech. And that has to be very meaningful for him. Father made him apologize for bringing this up publicly. Yeah, that makes sense too. And it was Kim who said, "This is a soul," which is huge as well. Kanye's self-conscious about the topic because he's a man. And he says like, that's part of a strategy to take the male out of the conversation. He said both people need to be a part of it, which Cannon starts to bring up as well, right? The counterpoint of like, whose body is it, et cetera, et cetera. Then Kanye said he heard you can like do that up to 9 months, and Cannon has a face kind of like, 9 months, like, ew. Because usually the baby's born by 9 months, right? And then talks about how he posted a 24-week-old fetus on Twitter and the backlash that he got, which that was something that I commented on as well, because usually 24 weeks is like way past when it happens. But he was saying that he was trying to appeal to humanity, and says there is no humanity by how people responded to him crying. Yeah, the crying thing, like, he's upset over what he felt could have happened to his daughter and the responsibility he would have had to carry around for that, especially knowing who North is now and like the choice he almost made. Like, that has to be a crazy thing to think about. And I understand why it would make somebody cry, but a lot of people are just like, this is a sign of like craziness, insanity, blah, 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 blah. I didn't even talk about how he talks about like, it's not crazy, it's Yeezy, right? Like, you have this big idea and something's like Yeezy, right? It's not crazy, it's Yeezy. So since there's no humanity, then there just has to be God or man. You can't serve two masters. Who are you working for? And he talks about, bro, we be having to act like housekeepers in America. Just the way in which celebrities, and especially black celebrities, have to watch everything that they say, everything that they do. And it says strong, influential black voices have to act like housekeepers. Like, you have to be on your best behavior all the time because you're called crazy if you act outside of the slave service mentality this society wants for black people. And he talked about when he was in the hospital, he wanted to start a church in Calabasas. And then for a second kind of jumps back and like about Gap and the idea that when your name's connected to the stock price, maybe you do have to watch a little bit about what you say and do. And like Nick Cannon and Kanye both had that like happen, with Nick Cannon with Viacom and Kanye now with Gap, and both kind of have that awareness of, yeah, there's this like golden handcuffs with that, and how much do you listen to that and how much do you not. And then he talks about David and Goliath and talks about spending every dime from Yeezy to, on Sunday service, which he then kind of corrects a little bit because it's more the Yeezy marketing budget. The Yeezys were selling themselves, so he didn't really have to advertise them. So the 50 million that was set aside for marketing, he just got to use on the flights, on opera, and people were saying that he was like trying to make money from Sunday service when it was just something he was spending out of pockets. And the David and Goliath conversation focuses more on the fact that David was an underdog because of the size of Goliath, but David had been out tending the sheep, which involved like killing bears, killing lions, and doing all this awesome stuff that made his fight against Goliath not necessarily a challenge for him because he had been fighting bears and lions and the like. So kind of this idea that Kanye has been doing these other things that then allow him to, like, stuff with Yeezy then allows him to do other stuff, right? He can then go have these operas and pay for Sunday service because of the success of his work with Yeezy. Yeah, I invested it in saying Jesus' name on high is kind of where the interview leaves off. And this is me talking for 45 minutes about this interview. So we'll see about condensing whatever part two has or doing the exact same thing. But I'm just going to end it here. No ending spiel. I can't believe I talked for 45 minutes. Until next time, keep it wavy and stay loopy. Cheers.